Algebra 2, we're moving on to lesson 4-7, and now we're solving polynomial equations. You did this with me in Algebra 1. So much like factoring. Our essential question says, can you solve polynomial equations? So they start us off nice and easy. Notice this polynomial equation is already factored. Okay, so it says to solve and identify double roots. Do you see how we have two things that are being multiplied? We're going to set each one equal to 0. So the first step, well, this one's already solved for us. This one, we have to subtract the 6 over. And when I divide by 2, I have two solutions. So that's saying that q equals 0 and q equals -3. So notice if I put -3 in here, because this is the one we solved for, that would give us 0. And if I put 0 in here, that would give us 0. And remember that since they're being multiplied, anything times 0 is 0. So usually they're not kind enough to factor it for us, but in this case they were. So let's look at this next one. This next one, if I solve for a squared equals 0. So when I take the square root of each side, notice that a is equal to 0. And 2a minus 7 quantity squared is equal to 0. Well, if I take the square root of each side, that just cancels out. The square root of 0 is 0. So this is just saying 2a minus 7 equals 0. Add the 7 over. Divide by 2, and we get 7/2. Now, we do have to put dr because notice there are two of these. So dr stands for double root. And notice there are two of these. So my answers are a equals 0 double root and a equals 7 over 2 double root. So like I said, they don't always have it factored for us. So in this case, we have to know how to factor, which we do. What are the factors of 6 that add up to be 7? That would be 6 times 1. Now, I start to, at this point, teach my students a little trick, because notice if I had x plus 1 equals 0, I'm just going to subtract 1, and we get -1. So notice x would equal -1 over here. And if I have x plus 6 equals 0, when I subtract 6, I get -6. So I get -6 over here. So I tell my students, hey, let's look at what this is and take out the opposite. Now, that doesn't work for questions like this with the 2a plus minus 7. So we'll come back to those and talk about those in that little trick. But kind of a fun little trick. My two answers here were x equals -1 and x equals -6. No double roots. Let's look at a couple more. This one is not solved for 0. So if you notice, the ones that we just did were solved for 0, 0, 0, but this one is not. So the first thing we have to do to solve what we call a quadratic equation is make it equal to 0. So I'm going to bring this 10 in the middle to set it up like a typical trinomial. What are the factors of 25 that add up to be -10? Good. That would be -5 and -5. So notice if I take the opposite out, this would just be x equals 5. And this one would also be x equals 5. But remember they said to solve it using double roots. So we would answer this as x equals 5 dr because there's a double root there. All right, one more in solving. U to the 4th equals 36u squared. The first thing I want to do is make it equal to 0. So I have u to the 4th minus 36u squared, because I'm just going to get that over by subtracting. And now we have to work on factoring. I can take out a u squared first. We always forget to take out the GCF. And u squared minus 36 can continue to factor to be a plus and a minus. So notice you've got to be really good at factoring. So what's the answer right here? Well, if I put in u squared equals 0 and take the square root of each side, u is equal to 0, and that will be a double root because of that square. If I take u plus 6 equals 0, when I subtract it, I get u equals negative 6. And when I have u minus 6 equals 0, when I add that 6 over, I get u equals 6. So notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4 answers. That is a 6. So I have 0, 0, negative 6, and positive 6. So notice there are 4 answers. And you're going to start to notice that they correlate with the highest exponent that you have. Great job. Don't forget to like and subscribe.